Hello, welcome to episode 40 of Scuttlebutt, a Marine Corps Association podcast. I want to apologize for the unplanned week off we had last week. There's been a lot going on. Vic is obviously out of town. There's been a few vacations. And did you know that we now have basically a summer holiday season now between Memorial Day, Juneteenth, and the upcoming 4th of July? There's a lot going on. So between all that and some COVID that propped up, we had to take the week off last week. But this week we've got Nick Kalt, who is the very embodiment of putting your body on the line for service to your fellow man. It's a great conversation. I think you're going to love it. It's a little bit longer this week, so enjoy.
Welcome to another awesome episode of Scuttlebutt. I'm Vic. I'm here in beautiful Southern California, San Clemente, California, just a few miles north of the North Gate at Camp Pendleton in beautiful San Clemente. And I'm here. I'm so honored and humbled to be here with Nick Kalt. He's a Long Beach fire captain at Long Beach Fire Department. Former Marine, former combat engineer. Nick, man, thank you so much for welcoming me into your home and having me here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming down. It's super convenient for you to come down, but really appreciate you making the time.
Dude, this is great. And like I was telling you when I got here, like any excuse I can come up with to come to San Clemente, I'm going to jump all over, man. Yeah. So, and then as many of the listeners know, for those who haven't tuned in before, I am from San Clemente. So this is truly a wonderful homecoming and such a great opportunity to sit here in your beautiful home, just a few miles, got even a mile from the beach even.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
You got surfboards in the back, you got wetsuits in the bathroom, and it really brings me back. It's very different than my life in Northern Virginia. So I just got to ask me, like, what's it like being a former Marine living in such a Marine sort of centric town like San Clemente?
Yeah, well, it's fun. I mean, so I initially bought our house with a roommate of mine who's also a Marine. He's a 46 pilot.
This actual home here?
This home.
Yeah, okay.
And he was really adamant about buying a place. I had my heart in my throat the whole time. Didn't necessarily think it was a good idea.
Yeah.
Here we are almost 20 years later. It's like, yeah, it's a pretty good idea. But it's pretty funny. We bought this place and I could literally run to work in the morning.
Yeah. Door
to door from here to first CEB was like.
Yeah, because you're out of Mateo, right?
Yeah. It's like a 3-mile jog, Yeah. And if I was feeling lazy, I'd just have someone drop me off at the back gate or whatever.
Yeah.
And, like just walk a mile or whatever. But now I'm driving, like 50 miles to work every day. So that part didn't necessarily work out, but.
Yeah, go the opposite direction. Yeah.
But San Clemente, as you know, and welcome home, by the way.
Thank you.
It is a really cool little intersection of like where the Marine Corps sort of meets like this hub of the surf community, not just here in Southern California, but really like nationally and in a lot of ways internationally, along with this crazy mix of like the very few locals who have held on. And then, as you know, like so few people in Southern California are actually from Southern California.
Yeah, exactly.
So you got all the transplants too. It's just like a really neat but small community of folks who kind of come from all walks and have sort of seemed to like make it work and mesh in a location that's pretty unique and pretty cool.
Dude, yeah, and it's so great to be back, not just in San Clemente, but here specifically, because you're in one of the few areas that has sort of survived the rapid development and the quote-unquote progress of the real estate market, of the bigger, better home, the overdevelopment. So you guys are pretty well insulated here. I mean, just driving up, a close friend of ours, grew up just a few blocks from here. And I mean, that neighborhood looks exactly the same as when I was in third grade going to Concordia, which is, as you know, just over the freeway. I mean, all of the state parks, it looks the same. So, I mean, this is really a great place. I don't know.
Yeah.
You feel sort of the same?
No, so it's this
it has the character, right?
But you're right. It's insulated. It has a ton of character. I think at the time, so probably when you were growing up here, this was like the rough part of town.
Dude, tell me about
Which
it.
is funny to think about it now because it's like all these homes are like so nice, and the word gentrification is probably not the correct term, but now it's so many like just clusters of small families and people who love to surf. Obviously, the proximity to the beach is like I think what really drives a lot of people to want to live here. But it, like when we bought the place, I wasn't like, oh yeah, great schools, you know, like, a bunch of kids from my
because you're in your early 20s,
like
right?
a single Marine, like, you know, drinking beer on the weekends and you know doing my Marine Corps thing, like in the field 3 weeks out of the month, if you're lucky, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
well, even you were saying when we met earlier, like when you guys were first looking at the home, didn't your neighbors come out with like,
they did.
like here's some beers, like
kegerator, like the frosted mugs in the freezer, and like, welcome to the neighborhood kind of thing. Like,
dude, that's so funny.
Trying to promote us to move into the neighborhood.
That's so cool. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, so I guess then let's backtrack all the way then. So obviously we talked about you being a combat engineer, did your West Coast tour here at Mateo, but you're from Wisconsin.
I am.
Yeah, so that's quite a journey.
Yeah, the land of cheddar and sausage and beers.
Yeah, and cold weather.
Cold ass weather, yeah.
Yep. So talk us through some of that. So you don't come from a military family, right?
No, I mean, so both my grandfathers served kind of during World War II, and I didn't necessarily grow up hearing a lot of stories about it. I think my maternal grandfather was so young that he was really he made it as far as England, and I think the war kind of met its end when he arrived there. So he was pretty young as far as the World War II vets were concerned. And my other grandfather just frankly never talked about his service in the Pacific, and so I kind of knew in the back of my mind that element of military service existed in my family, but it was never. There weren't any shadow boxes on the wall. It wasn't like I was going outside to salute the flag.
You're right. You guys were doing morning colors.
No, nothing like
the
that.
yard.
Yeah, nothing like that.
Okay.
So, yeah, my dad was literally a beer salesman, and my mom was a nurse.
Dude,
which are
two of the greatest.
Great public services in and of themselves, right? But
everybody serves.
That's right. But not a lot of exposure to the military when I was a kid.
So So you end up at Naval Academy. What was that trend? What was that path like?
So growing up, like sports was my life, and I mean, to the extent that my dad sat me down at one point and was like, you might want to get a job and independently have access to some money, but he's like, if we'll scrape for whatever money that you really need to do some of the personal stuff you want to do, but your job is to enjoy school, play sports, get decent grades, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I grew up in like a really, I hate to say it, but almost like a very like nice, comfortable, like very little like childhood trauma or anything like there's no like dramatic origin story.
Yeah.
It's just like lower middle class America of just like, I love playing sports. So I kind of got off track.
No, it's all good, yeah.
There was a guy that I really looked up to that I played football with and was on the track team with. He was a couple years older than me. And he sort of planted the seed of an idea of the Naval Academy in my head. He had gone out to a program that they have called Summer Seminar, which is like a week-long sort of intro course that you can do, almost like a summer camp for prospective students. And he went out there and came back and was talking to me about it. I'm like, man, that sounds awesome. And frankly, I'd probably be inventing something if I told you why I thought it was so awesome at the time. Yeah. But it just sounded like, for me in my very young brain, it sounded like, oh, this is like a top of the line engineering school, which I've always wanted to do engineering. This is an opportunity to serve your country, which at the time and still to this day sounded like something that seemed like very noble. Just kind of off the top of my head.
And this is late 90s, right? So this is the Clinton era.
Like mid 90s.
Yeah.
Yep. I graduated high school in 96, so this is probably like 94 time frame.
Yeah.
And then also, like the opportunity to go and continue like playing sports. So
Yeah.
the Naval Academy had huge appeal for like a broad spectrum of reasons. And then my dad and I took a recruiting trip, with the football team out there. And it was one of those days where if you've never been to Annapolis, it's like a ton of history, cobblestone
Dude,
streets.
it's gorgeous.
Right on the water.
Yeah.
They're like sailboats scudding across the bay with rays of sunlight shining down.
Yeah.
Your jaw drops as
Yeah.
like a high school kid from Wisconsin that's barely seen the ocean. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I can be talked into this, you know?
Yeah. So then you arrive, you're a plebe, and you're on scholarship. Is that right?
No, so they don't really have
I guess that's right,
a scholarship program, and that's the nice thing about it is that like I think my parents paid like $2,000 for
the scholarship is your
fees,
your payback tour that you have to do when you finish, right? But you're invited to come on for the football team. Is that right at the time?
Yeah, and I got to preface this by saying like I was a pretty average football player on a horrible high school football team. We were like the Bad News Bears.
Yeah.
We didn't win a single game in the 4 years that I played high school football, which is
a lot of opportunities to learn.
A ton of resilience building, right? So it's like I saw an opportunity to continue my athletic career and essentially like walked onto the football team kind of deal. And I never suited up for a varsity football game. I played that first year, but to me it was an opportunity to continue.
I mean, that's D1, that's big time. That's a program. Like
it is. It's a full on. It is a program. It is a business, and it's impressive.
Yeah, I mean that's having played a little bit of ball in my time too. It's like if you start looking at the attrition factor.
Yep.
Practically every high school in America has a football team, and every one of those teams is usually maxed out with just as many jerseys as they can put bodies in.
Yep.
So you're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of high school football players, and then you get to D1 and there's just maybe 1,000.
Right.
So I mean that attrition factor is big time. So I mean to even have that level of exposure is something very, very unique.
No, it was really cool, and my jersey number might as well have been like 118. But it was
like, is your number pi? Like what is that on your?
But it was a very unique exposure to like, hey, this isn't about just like. Not only just having fun and developing yourself as an athlete anymore, but it's truly a business.
Yeah, I mean, this is
level, and it's
like what annually you guys play Notre Dame.
Yep.
I mean, you're in there with
the Army Navy
game is massive, right?
Even just as a member of the student body, and talk about whatever sports rivalry you want to, but I don't think anything compares to it. The level of intensity is just above and beyond anything else I think that you could imagine. But also super fun.
Yeah.
Mixed in with all that. And I made it through spring ball, which I felt like was a huge accomplishment. I played tight end in high school. They didn't have a tight end in the offense at the time, so they're like, "Yeah, you're too slow to be a defensive end, so we're going to make you an offensive tackle." I mean, I'm 200 pounds soaking wet coming out of the summer. It's like, okay, so your goal weight is 280, and we're going to need you to eat to the point that you're nauseous at every meal.
That's right.
Wake up at midnight and eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and all this stuff, and it just didn't really like suit the type of athleticism that I was used to.
Yeah.
The guy that was ahead of me on the depth chart ended up, winning a couple Super Bowl championships and being an All-Pro offensive tackle.
Yeah, so that's a tough one to break into.
Panthers, and it's like, okay.
And it's not like he was a senior, you're a freshman, right? Like, weren't you guys just like...
He was a year older.
Yeah.
So I saw the handwriting on the wall.
Yeah. And so then you moved over, though, into something else.
I transitioned to rugby, which was phenomenal, and loved everything about it, still to this day. And I've kind of like, for being as involved in childhood sports as I was, I've sort of migrated away from, I don't really go to any baseball games. I don't watch a whole lot of sports on TV, but I still follow rugby scores and occasionally like tune in for a tournament or something like that.
Yeah, there's a pretty decent rugby squad just down the street, right? In San Diego,
it's
right?
It's developing, specifically in California, but really throughout the United States.
Yeah.
More than it was certainly when I was a kid.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when I was in Afghanistan, where we were at in Marja, we had a bunch of like Kiwis and Brits and stuff. We're sort of like this multinational thing at the government center. And man, it was during the World Cup. And obviously, all blacks are all everything. Man. It was so great. But yeah, I really got into sort of the zeitgeist of that rugby culture.
It's a whole culture.
It's so fun. Yeah, dude. It's so fun. Like just even not really having much exposure to rugby other than its linkages to American football. It still was so great to see, and like that level of competitiveness, and like how everyone was so encouraging, even of their rivals and of the other squads. Right.
And that's the phenomenal part about rugby, and truly, like, so I left. I had never quit anything before in my life, and I'd made it through spring ball, and I was like, man, I'm really letting some people down here. Like, frankly, myself and whoever else believes in me by not continuing on with football. But I just wasn't happy. And I went to the rugby team, and it was like immediate transition. I remember the first game we played was against this Canadian team that we played annually. They're a really solid team from Ontario, and they came down, and it's like I'm not even of age to drink, but afterwards these guys are going out to the bar, and the entire culture comes to the bar with you, and it was like, holy shit, this is awesome. And it's like an entire thing. Not only did the type of athleticism and sort of the progression of the game, as it's like a complex environment. There are no timeouts. There's no coaches on the field. Like, you get 10 minutes at halftime, and then you're back in the mix. And that's it. And so that stuff all suited me so much better. But then you incorporate the culture into it. And we subsequently traveled to some foreign countries and played in Ireland, South Africa.
Man, which those aren't teams to sneeze at.
No, but you show up and you beat the hell out of each other for 80 minutes, and then you're instantly plugged into like the like you said, the zeitgeist, but like the inside of like the most intimate social scene, which is like the local pub. Like, hey, these are the best things to do in town. Hey, you have to meet this guy. And it is just such a cool way to interact with another culture that's, I mean, frankly, it's an athletic event. And it could just be that, but it's so much more.
That's awesome. And then, so that sort of, that level of camaraderie, that sort of tight-knit culture, that, brotherhood of arms, if you will, seems to have been very attractive to you. Is that then when you were at the Naval Academy, then you declared, hey, I want to go Marine, I want to go green side instead of blue side? Because it's selective at that level, right?
It is. And I think that was part of it, subconsciously. A lot of my close friends and my core group of friends that I was tight with were rugby guys, almost to a person. It's not to say that I didn't have other friends, but that's just how tight it was. And almost to a man, they all went Marine Corps as well, which I'm sure influenced my selection in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think the concept of camaraderie and the concept of almost kind of like being in the suck. Because rugby is that too. It's you're drinking.
It's trench warfare, man.
You're in the suck for 80 minutes as well, and it's that shared sense of sacrifice and suffering that I think it was hard for me to maybe put my finger on at the time, but it was part of the real appeal.
That's great. And then for those listeners who aren't aware, to declare yourself a Marine isn't just saying like, "Hey, I'll go." I mean, it's what, top 16%. Get selected. It's
not necessarily top 16 because like people you have to rank all your choices, everything from Navy SEALs to Supply Corps, right, and everything in between. And a lot of people are maybe not physically qualified for one or the other for whatever reason. At the time, they wouldn't let you fly if you had eyesight that was not within the vision standards, and so. Some fields were restricted to a lot of people, but if you're like the top performer, they're taking into consideration combat scores, your grades, your athletic performance, and then they have they conduct interviews for each individual community. There's PT evaluations for those individual communities, and so Marines was competitive. I don't know if it was the most competitive. I'd say probably like the special warfare selection was maybe the most competitive, just because far fewer number of spots, and I think to a certain kind of person that's like hyper attractive as well.
Sure.
But yeah, Marine Corps ground was by far my number one choice out of the options that I had presented to me. And yeah, it becomes kind of competitive, but it's not to the point where you're like fighting other guys off or
Right.
there's no like one-upsmanship or anything like that.
right. Like you're sabotaging people in their inspections and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so you finish up, you get a engineering degree out of the Naval Academy.
Yep.
And
Never
then
used it since.
Right. And then you head, just a few miles down the road to TBS.
Right.
And so let's talk about that. So much in the same way as the Naval Academy, exposure to all the various jobs within the Navy.
Yeah.
Now you're being exposed to all the various jobs within the Marine Corps ground side.
Yeah.
And I think we talked before, you had some friends who were on flight contracts. You mentioned how the difference in that sort of culture, but then also that like perspective on what TBS was offering.
Yeah. So, and for those listeners who have been to TBS or know it, to know it is to like understand it and kind of love it. But the way they break it down, as you know, is they break it down with what they call the rule of thirds. And they like say there are 300 people graduating out of a TBS class, and they'll break it into the top 100 performers, the middle 200, the middle 100, and then the bottom 100. And, if you want to be, infantry officer, well, if you're number one, you get your first choice. And then number 100 gets the second choice.
Yeah.
And so they try and call
quality spread.
Quality spread.
Yeah.
Spread.
Like I always say, man, like for me, it was good to be the top of the bottom third.
Yeah. But like I wish I could have been that top of the bottom third as well. It might have been a little bit easier on me. But so the only guarantee is if you have a flight contract, right? Then you don't have to worry about anything. You're not worried about impressing anybody. And so it's kind of funny. Like we all joined in Fox Company, which is the last to go. Mm-hmm. So there are very few Naval Academy guys. Most guys are coming, from
the OCC guys, direct commissions.
Exactly. And those guys are all like fresh head shaved down to the skin, like, yes, sir, no, sir. And a bunch of us I went with a bunch of my rugby buddies who tried to time it so that we could go together. And we're kind of like longer, hippie-ish looking hair and like throwing each other into the mud, like on the obstacle course, and just like frankly just kind of like fucking off a little bit here and there without like jeopardizing our performance. But all my buddies are like flight contracts, and so they don't necessarily have to worry about their performance. And I was looking at it, and it's like, man, there's no, as much as you try and game the game or work the system, like good luck trying to find your way to the top of the second third or the top of the bottom third.
Because you don't know.
No, and it's not really like my way, nor is it most people's way, I'm sure, to go to join the Marine Corps and then try and do something half-assed. So the intent was just like, well, kick as much ass as possible, wind up at the top of that top third, and then go from there. And if your pick's available, make it happen. And I wanted to be a combat engineer just based on my limited exposure.
Nice, dude. I love that. That is a new word. That's going. That's going in the style guide for sure.
Please don't edit that out. I've never said explosion before in my life. But I thought explosives were cool. But it was described to me as kind of being a grunt with a brain or a grunt with some app. And I had an engineering degree, and just the concept of mobility and counter mobility, for whatever reason, like really appealed to kind of my mathematical brain.
As an engineer, man, it seems to make total sense.
Yeah. So that was the direction I wanted to go, and I was fortunate enough to get it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then, fast forward, combat engineer school, and then Mateo.
Yep.
And this is 2000? You showed up to the fleet?
So I graduated in May of 2000. So TBS was kind of like fall of 2000 into spring of 2001. Combat engineer school, spring of 2001 leading into summer.
Okay.
So I came out to Mateo. If I'm remembering correctly, like July of 2001.
And then less than 90 days later.
Yeah.
We're at war.
Right.
So for me, and obviously I don't want this to be about me, but I think contextually, same sort of thing. I showed up to the fleet in 99, Clinton era, the real meat eaters were the Muse. Everybody else was doing a UDP.
Yep.
Or maybe, on the East Coast, you could get a Unitas sort of thing. But there wasn't a lot of, the combat vets, when we were coming in, were the dudes who did the Kosovo thing.
Yeah.
Or maybe you get some old Saltour in Somalia.
Yeah, maybe a Desert Storm guy.
East Timor, maybe somebody was out that way.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's the Muse, it's bilat training, and there's not a lot of what we would see in the future.
Yeah.
Dude, 9/11 happens, and everybody's wearing their brown pants. And so for me, I was down at Del Mar, and as you know, with Del Mar, the only thing separating the barracks, access to the camp, and I-5 freeway is like a chain link fence. So, dude, everybody's to the armory. We're loading up. We're freaking out. You guys are just up the street from the San Onofre nuclear power plant.
Right.
What was that day like for you? What was 9/11 like for you guys?
Yeah. So I wasn't actually even I was a combat engineer officer, but I'd been assigned to the motor T platoon just because they didn't have a combat engineer platoon to give. So I was in charge of motor T, and we were PTing that morning. We were playing basketball. Yeah. And we showed up back from the basketball courts. Everybody's all sweaty and showering up and stuff. And it's like, what is on the news? Yeah. And I remember kind of seeing things play out at the CP just on the news throughout the day, and it's kind of a foggy understanding now looking back on it, 20 years later, the events of that day. But the overarching impression is that, okay, we're at war. And at the time, it was like,
what does that even mean, right?
Yeah, it's just really ambiguous. It's like, who with? Who are we at war with?
Mm-hmm,
Someone's declared war on us, but it's really hard to conceptualize that.
Right.
And I think in the months that followed, our training, really ramped up. I was given charge of a combat engineer platoon. Our training sort of followed the path that we all saw, maybe on the news of hey, here's the responsibility, and this is essentially what we're going to do about it as a nation. And we sort of tracked. We started to track on Afghanistan, and then I think slowly after that on Iraq. And we can talk about more the reasons, whether they're right or wrong for going to those places, but ultimately it sort of coalesced into this training pipeline of hey, and too, it's signed up during the peacetime military. And what was really interesting for me was it really makes you evaluate the oath that you've taken and the sacrifices that you're hopefully willing to make. So we dealt with some conscientious objectors up until that point. And, it really made you evaluate the oath that you took and to what level are you willing to really kind of sacrifice on behalf of this nation that's called you to service.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, man, because it's so hard to look back on it without overlaying the past 20 years. Mm-hmm. But I know, at least from what I'm trying to remember and glean from those times, was also this sense of, dude, let's really figure this thing out, because like you said, there's not a sovereign nation that just attacked us. There's not uniformed combatants in Manhattan taking ground and holding position.
Right.
It's this completely ambiguous, asymmetric threat.
Right.
And as we start to learn more about what Al-Qaeda was and what violent extremism was, it's dude, it is everywhere, and there's all of these. It's a spider web, and we're trying to find a way to cut the web or whatever it was. I mean, it was just so insane. But the nation is calling on us to respond. We're super pissed. We want to respond.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was such a crazy time, and yeah, it's hard to divest that experience from what we know now.
It's virtually impossible,
right?
And I think I told you before we did the show, I have a complicated relationship, with the Marine Corps, and good and bad. right? And I think, at the time, it was a bit difficult because the only deployment I ever did was to Iraq, and at the time it was a bit difficult even for me as a young CO of a platoon to connect those dots a little bit. But at the same time, and I think to this day it kind of rings true, is that the desire to serve and the intent matters. And the whole reason I joined up in the first place was with the intent to serve. And to a certain degree, your contract with the United States Marine Corps, with the contract of the United States government, is that you're a tool of United States international policy. Whether the powers that be, who are elected officials by we the people, choose to utilize you in a manner that you find is suitable or not, ultimately remains to be seen. But to me, the intent matters, and the character behind it matters. The character of the Marines matter, and that I think has been a part of me coming to terms here 15 years removed from being out of the Marine Corps as like I am proud of the service that I gave. Did I always necessarily agree, especially with hindsight being 2020, with maybe some of the reasons that we were over there? No, not necessarily. But I love those Marines like brothers, and that service and that camaraderie is really, I think, the crux of it. Yeah. And Iraq being what it was, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a little bit as well, but it's a validation for all the training that we do, and really like what had been the focus of my entire adult life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, just for those, all of these wounds, I think, or all of these scars opened up again after the very abrupt withdrawal from Afghanistan.
100%.
And it was like, here we go again, because we'd all just experienced it a few years before when we abruptly pulled out of Iraq, and then ISIS came into prominence. And so I think it's really hard to divest our memory from our knowledge. But at the same time, I know, even as I was having a complicated relationship with the war and in uniform, even as late as 2007 and 2008, when we were in Abu Hayat, just south of Haditha and Haklaniya, just outside of Al-Assad, the thing that I focused on, that I, again, like you're saying, have so much pride in that I will take with me to the grave, is that regardless of whatever the foreign policy was, and regardless of what our elected officials had at the strategic level, dude, at the tactical level, what we were doing mattered, and there was goodness there. We liberated a village, and granted, it's maybe only a few hundred people, but those 100 people no longer had to live under the umbrella of tyranny anymore, because we were there, and we said, no, this isn't happening under our watch. And just like Charlie Company, 3rd Tracks, just like, I think it was 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. I think it was, all of these other units that went in there and said the exact same thing and drew that line in the sand and said, you're not going to terrorize these people anymore. That shit matters. And nothing's going to take that away from us. And so, anyways, that's my soapbox on that one. And I hope in some way that resonates.
Yeah. So it's like, you may agree or disagree with the reasons for going. Ultimately, I think they were unclear at the time, but we did a lot of good work over there. We, a big part of my job as a combat engineer, I was assigned to rebuild a bunch of schools in the town of Najaf, which
Najaf, for sure.
Largely Shiite region that had frankly been neglected and fairly beat up as a result of the previous regime that was there. One of the most, I think, influential and hopefully impactful things that we did while we were there. To not have the follow up is difficult.
Yeah,
you like that. But the other thing too is it's like, okay, agree or disagree, but I'm also not going to not be there.
right, right.
These are my guys. This is a validation for the training that we're going to be doing. And if I'm not there to do it with them, then someone else is going to be doing it. And frankly, this is my job to do.
Yeah. And I've never been more hopeful of the future of America in seeing these 18 to 25-year-olds doing the work that they were doing under these just absolutely horrific conditions against this seemingly omnipresent enemy that wanted nothing more than to see them all coming home in a body bag.
Right.
And to see the ways in which they performed, I was like, we're gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Like, this country is in good hands because these Marines are fucking unbelievable. And I know, and we'll get to this, but I mean, you were in Fallujah, but I got a lot of those same guys back.
Yeah.
And they're going again, and not only going again, but then being told, hey, those same dudes you were fighting with in Fallujah are now on our side, and you're going to partner with them.
Yeah.
You're going to do patrolling with them.
Yeah.
You're going to stand post with them. You're going to fight against this enemy with them, even though just 18 months ago, you guys were like full on hooking and jabbing in one of the most historic battles, in Marine Corps history. And to see them take that on and do the wonderful, I mean, again, I can't say enough about that generation of Marines because I was just so impressed almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so I guess enough about the world according to Vic. But so then 9/11 happens, but you don't go until 2004. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So what was that? You guys were just preparing, just training?
Yeah, we were ramping up our training, and being combat engineers, a lot of our training dealt with demolition, and it was, as all training is, sort of the crawl, walk, run, but maybe a bit accelerated just due to the fact that, okay, and like we were talking about, like, we know we're at war now, and as that sort of coalesced, so did our training specific to the region and the enemy that we figured we'd be fighting. And so we were conducting a lot of like urban breaching, urban mobility in the lead up to the initial assault into Iraq in 2003. And it's a super long story, but ultimately we were at a training range one evening conducting some live fire training with some demolition, and I suffered a pretty significant training accident and partial amputation of my right and left hands, and fortunately not a whole lot of additional injuries because it could have been a lot worse. I was holding on to an explosive charge as it detonated.
Jeez. And then, so, I mean, what was that recovery like? I mean, at the time, was it going through your mind, or you're just like, this is it, like, I'm not going to be a Marine in uniform any longer?
I didn't know, it was, I think that was pretty far from my mind at that point. The initial reaction was just kind of like a massive F-bomb, like, what just happened? Mm-hmm. And so immediately following, the sense of depression that I felt and sort of the resignation, not only that I was now like physically altered and changed, and in some ways you call it like incapacitated, but also the assault on the Union was now, this is November of 2002, and the war is essentially imminent at this point.
Yeah.
And your boys are about to deploy without you.
Yeah. I mean, there are units already heading to Kuwait at this point.
Yep. And very shortly thereafter, my platoon did just that. And the physical recovery, the immediate physical recovery was pretty significant. I was in the hospital for upwards of a month, probably just surgeries, rehabilitation, all that stuff. But I wasn't fit for deployment at the time when my entire battalion rolled around and for deployment. And in the same vein, right, like the MEU was the place to be. Up until 9/11 happened, it was like, as a combat engineer especially, we have an entire battalion of Marines virtually none of whom ever deploy. Only our Alpha company was designated for deployment, one platoon at a time with a MEU.
Yep.
And so the meat eaters were the guys who were selected to be an Alpha company. And they would rotate through this deployment cycle. You get one pump, and that was it. That was like, hey, join the Marine Corps, see the world. That was your one opportunity to actually deploy up until that point.
Yeah.
And, subsequently, so my entire battalion leaves without me, and I'm the senior man left behind with kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of the sick, lame, and lazy.
Yeah.
All the folks that couldn't or wouldn't deploy. And it was a really small contingent, out of a battalion of maybe 800 Marines, maybe like 20 of us didn't deploy. And so I'm left sitting there, and as we just talked about, it's like, I'll be damned if someone else is going to go over there and do this job that I've raised my hand to say I was going to do. And I would be lying to you if I told you that I was like sunshine and rainbows at the time.
Sure.
I certainly wasn't.
Yeah. And this is going to be a reoccurring theme throughout, but when we talk, you're like the poster boy for like perseverance and resilience. And so, whereas many probably would have been like, all right, this is it. Let me just start working on the next phase of my life. You're like, fuck that. Like, I'm going.
Yeah.
So you get into the recovery. Has anybody at this point told you like, hey, you're not going to be able to do this thing? Or was it pretty encouraging? Like, hey, if you want to stay with it, we'll get you where you want to be.
Yeah. So a good question. And I didn't know at the time. And so they put you before the med board, right?
Yeah.
Which is convened by, at the time, he's a Navy surgeon. He was an orthopedic surgeon. And I don't remember the guy's name. I wish I did, but he was super cool. And at the time, I sort of transitioned from being in this sort of dark, like, woe is me place to, hey, my mission is to get myself better. And if the opportunity does arise again, to pounce on it. And so I transitioned into sort of recovering. And the officer that can be in this med board was essentially like, hey, prove to me that you can do all the things that a Marine is expected to do. Fire a weapon, do pull-ups, all the stuff that's expected of you, operate a radio. And so I rehabbed with that being my intent. And I went through all the wickets to pass through the med board and still retain my commission, which I did. And as we all now know, in hindsight, the boys came home from their deployment to Iraq in fairly short order.
Yeah.
Not unscathed, certainly, but almost with a sense of, hey, we were there for a few months and the lion's share of the work is done. And now we maintain a presence there, and everybody, hops on board with this ideal of what we got going on over there.
Yeah.
Very soon found out that, that was not necessarily the case. But I had rehabbed to the point where when they got back, like shortly thereafter, I was essentially deployment ready shortly thereafter. And my battalion commander at the time had pity on me or had some foresight or whatever, but essentially put me in a position where I was now platoon commander in Alpha Company, which again, Alpha Company was the company designated to attaching a platoon to that battalion landing team of the MEU. So at least, the potential existed for me to get a pump in, if nothing else.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I landed into Alpha Company.
So instead of a pump, you guys had to do Iraq.
Yeah, we got
just in time for
do not pass go, do not pay $200.
Is this Fallujah 2?
Yeah, we were there for Fallujah 2. Okay. So we floated in, I want to say May of 2004. So I believe Fallujah Part 1 was kind of
like April,
like March, April
of
that same year, and obviously with some pretty disastrous consequences.
Sure.
And some pretty bitter taste left in a lot of Marine Corps mouths, for sure, right? So we were part of Fallujah Part 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you guys do the cordon, you burn it up, you give them 72 hours. Anybody left is a shithead and we're coming in.
Kind of. Well, even before that was Najaf, right?
Yeah, okay.
A lot of people forget about Najaf.
Yeah.
But Najaf really was like, we kind of like take over for an army unit there. What was previously kind of this Sleepy Hollow with a sort of handshake agreement of you don't shoot at us, we don't shoot at you, absolutely exploded in the summer of 2004. And it was, the fighting was tombstone to tombstone, into the heart of this massive warren for really kind of like well in excess of a month. So that was kind of like us cutting our teeth over there. And for me, not having even been in the march up in 2003, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is fairly intense.
Yeah.
And then we got the entire BLT did not transfer from Najaf to Fallujah. We got farmed out along with, I think, our tanks, snipers, and just a couple little odds and ends to support, the cordon and then the attack down into Fallujah. Yeah. So we got a pretty healthy chunk.
Yeah. So I mean, you're hooking and jabbing from the moment you get there up until you're on patrol, right?
Yeah.
And you've transitioned. You're now out of Najaf in Fallujah. Is that correct?
Fallujah, yeah. We had created the combat breach there's like an infamous set of train tracks and a train station at the north end of the city. A ton of preparatory fire into the city. Even the presumption, I think, before going into Fallujah was, hey, we've done a bunch of psyops beforehand. We've dropped pamphlets. We're offering refuge and shelter. Anyone who wants out of the city.
3 hots on a cot if you make it out, right? Like you just walk out.
Yeah.
We're good.
And more.
Yeah.
And with the presumption that anybody left behind has ill intent.
Yeah.
And so we're assaulting into the city. We create the combat breach into the city, and then we're doing sort of follow-up operations. Ended up getting assigned to a unit with the designation of Task Force Bruno, which I believe fell under the command of RCT-1 at the time. And so it was us, the contingent of tracks, because we didn't have our own organic vehicles at the time. So you guys were driving us around, and some snipers providing sort of overwatch and security. And we would bypass a lot of hardened spots, or just to maintain momentum in the assault. And we would go back through and mop up. EOD was super taxed at the time.
Sure.
So with our our specialty in demolition, we sort of assumed this role as collecting up a bunch of weapons and munition.
UXO.
Yeah, otherwise, and not even UXO, but frankly, like being utilized to create IEDs, because the IED threat was just it was off the chart, and it was like as many advances as we could make, both tactically and technologically, they would leapfrog ahead of us. And so it's like almost on a daily basis sometimes, and gather all that stuff and controlled explosions virtually every night in order to make sure that it wasn't used against us. So that's kind of what we were doing, just patrolling block by block, and saying, hey, this house is search in progress, search complete, like secondary search complete, on to the next.
And then you came up on some folks.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we came up on some folks that had been bypassed. We exchanged some gunfire, and during an engagement, kind of in the center of town, I was shot. And
I guess, if you don't mind, sort of talk us through that.
Yeah.
I think I've heard in previous interviews that he felt like he got hit with a baseball bat.
Yeah, it felt like it was slammed. I don't know. I've never actually been hit with a baseball bat.
I mean, you can only imagine.
Yeah, like he was struck with a car or something like it. It was a hell of a smack, and I found myself face down in the dirt, and
it's outside of your body armor, right? So
so I wore almost like infamously small, like Gen 1 sappy plates. The flak vest. Had the little groin protector that's like just long enough to reaches down there. But it struck me in the side, kind of in my right hip. It was very fortunate that the round impacted not into my femur, but kind of maybe I'm lucky, maybe I'm not. I don't know. Certainly fortunate to be alive. Yeah. But the round passed through my right hip, out sort of like my upper left butt cheek area.
Man, how it missed all of your organs. So it's freaking amazing.
Yeah, it didn't miss all of them for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
All the super critical stuff.
Right.
It is, absolutely phenomenal to me. But yeah, very fortunate. But yeah, like obviously some pretty intense hemorrhaging that went along with it. Some really vague recollections of after I got shot to actually medevaced. I know, we were returning fire. Obviously, my Marines did an exceptional job of coordinating my medevac. Tanks came in and sort of assisted, not only like the combat engineers and the AAVs on the ground, but now tanks rolled in and kind of helped us mop that all up. But I remember, so my CO from the battalion landing team was up from the job to just kind of, hey, what are your redeployment needs? We're getting, kind of close to the end of our time there. And we have a really big logistical footprint of how are we going to move all your stuff back to the States? What does it look like transitioning you guys from Fallujah back to the job before we get back? And he was up essentially doing kind of like a field trip. And I just remember a couple of my Marines hucking me up under the arms, tossing me in an AAV. The AAV transferred me to his Humvee, and he's sitting in the front seat. And I handed him my map that had all of our search grids on it and registered targets. And hey, sir, this is where we took fire, kind of thing. The corpsman was in the back seat, and I handed him my dog tags. Okay, I'm positive. And I might need a few liters here, and everything after that, I'm presuming I went in shock because my memory is essentially non-existent.
Jeez, man, that's insane. So, you bounce around a little bit, right? So they take you up to Germany at first.
Yeah, I think I went to Bravo Surgical, which was in Fallujah, outside of Fallujah proper. But,
so you're in the cache at first.
And I think they did some pretty phenomenal things just to stabilize me and get me up to, Al-Assad.
Okay. Al-Assad.
But I wasn't away from it.
So then I think I've heard you say before, like when you start actually, your active memory engages that you're in Bethesda. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So you're back stateside now.
Yeah.
And I mean, what's going through your head?
Well, I mean, just the really weird existential trip that is having like 2+ weeks of your life essentially just like severed out, and now you're planted back in an environment that's completely foreign, and you're also very heavily sedated. I mean, frankly, I think I had a lot of hallucinations. I was having difficulty separating reality from whatever my mind was conjuring up.
Yeah, dude, it's so crazy, like how the mind will protect itself. In those ways, but it's got to be really jarring. Yeah,
well, in ways I still don't fully understand, and I think removed from the sedation fairly gradually, but my family was there. Thankfully, they had joined me in Germany, and I think done something that was far more traumatic than even this injury was for me, in just seeing me in the condition that I was. My parents were out on the medevac flight with me back, and not just me, but like a bunch of other sailors, Marines. Probably way more fucked up than I was.
I had a buddy in Fallujah, and he in a similar way took a ricochet and he was a casualty that took him out of the fight. And he said that his time in the cache was way worse than the actual injury itself. And I think he actually went old school and just once he was good enough to walk, he just left because he just couldn't be in there with all those young Marines just chewed up.
Well, dude, so again, just like my childhood was, I was super fortunate. It showed back up in Bethesda, and I had the support system of my parents, my brother, tons of well-wishers, right? Because we're in the D.C. area, which is really close to Annapolis, really close to TBS, which again is kind of where I cut my teeth as a Marine. And so I've got visitors all day, every day. If I want them, if I don't, they'll go away and come back.
What an odd, sort of, what's the word? I'm going to make up a word here, but like circularity of life, right? Like you've come full circle, right? Like this is where you entered into service.
Yeah.
This is where you, like I said, like where the clay has been molded, and then here you are back now.
Yeah.
You know, it's odd, man.
Yeah.
It kind of gives me goosebumps a little bit thinking about it.
No, me as well. And you know, I've been thinking about it a lot, maybe more lately now than ever, but just like a couple little things that I think about during that time at Bethesda. But, you know, first and foremost, it was a far more significant injury than the injury to my hands had been. But I know I've mentioned it previously, but I almost felt like I was primed to make a physical recovery, and for whatever reason knew that I was capable of doing it. Even like I had to literally learn how to rewalk again, and it wasn't even a question, and so there was no. You know, I remember going through my list of medications when I was finally coherent enough to evaluate like what they had going on, and I had the benefit of my mom being there too, who had been a nurse.
Yeah, nurse, right.
For like 35 years, and so not only is she like there for me personally and emotionally, but she's also advocating for my care and saying, he does not need this, he needs this. So I'm going down my list of medications like, hey, what's this? Oh, well, it's an antidepressant. We find that a lot of people that come back from an injury like this, super disoriented, upset on an antidepressant. Nope, get it off the list.
Yeah, let's not cross that bridge, burn that bridge just yet, right?
Yeah, I get the concept.
Yeah.
But, so not only am I primed for a physical recovery, and I'm not feeling any of the depression or like self-doubt or angst that was present from my hand injury, but now I'm like the senior guy on the ward at Bethesda, and it's like I don't know how to walk yet, but I was relearning how to walk. Right, and they gave me this walker, and these ladies had like crocheted a little like crochet piece. I don't even know what you call it, but like a little name placard.
Oh, nice.
On it, and like Velcroed on it.
Oh, that's really cool.
And so I'm making the rounds for all these young Marines and sailors that, like, frankly, sadly, didn't have the support structure and were suffering injuries for the first time, or injuries that were far more significant than mine, or both.
Right.
And it's like, I got to come and say hi to this guy.
Yeah.
You know, and that was by far like the most meaningful and the most difficult part of my recovery. I mean, my family might disagree with that, but
sure, for
me, being in Bethesda was hard for that reason. We talk about like the TBI ward and just the recovery that those folks have to make and still struggle with today. It's like the most difficult part, but also the most meaningful part of being in Bethesda.
Dude. Well, somebody else is making the rounds at that point too. And so you get your Bronze Star is given to you by somebody pretty special. I mean, not your Bronze Star, your Purple Heart.
Purple Heart,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
By talking about that.
Yeah, so President Bush visited and pinned my Bronze Star on me, and I remember
your Purple Heart. Yeah, sorry, I planted Bronze Star.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I definitely don't have a Bronze Star for all the listenership, by the way. But pinned my Purple Heart on me, and for better or for worse, and talking about the reasons for going or staying or leaving in Iraq. The man made the rounds. He made the trip, and he shook my hand. He hugged my parents, and ultimately, it's like if you're going to be the guy that's responsible for that, then you witness the results, good and bad, first person, and regardless of what else you'll say about him, he had the personal fortitude and the courage to come do that. Like I said, I know he visited with people that were far worse off than I was.
That's not political theater.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And it was never like the picture of him being taken with me while they wouldn't let me take pictures. It was done by his photographer.
Sure.
It wasn't ever like published anywhere.
Right. Dude, amazing. Well, hey, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
All right.
All right. Well, we're back, and just sort of during the break, we're talking a little bit about sort of our experiences, and first off, man, I just gotta say, like, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and for your willingness to be vulnerable, dude. I mean that was so powerful and profound.
Thank you for sharing too and allowing me to.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think I told you on the break that sometimes I feel like I get on my soapbox, and a lot of that soapbox has been generated over 20 years of like looking back and having the opportunity to filter things through a lens.
Yeah.
It's like
time has sort of allowed us, given us time has given us that ability to discern a little bit. But I mean, that's a soapbox you've earned, and like never ever apologize for getting up on that.
Maybe so, maybe not. Ultimately, it's a personal opinion, but at least I think it has the backing of me having been there, having met Iraqis, having generated friendships with them, having done my best to learn some of the language, having incorporated myself enough into the culture to say, hey, we're going to help you build the school. Hey, we're going to partner with this contractor. Hey, we're going to take care of this family who's like water main we fucked up while building the CP at the entrance to our fob.
Yeah.
And it's all those things like that where it's like, I think the intent of that stuff still matters. And overall, our reasons for going to Iraq, you probably picked up on. I have some pretty significant heartburn with, as well as our reasons for really not having a presence there anymore, because it's all these partnerships that we make over there, and I'm happy to say that at least I was there to try and do it to the best of my ability, to do those things that were genuinely good things, to do them right.
Yeah. It is hard, I think, to separate sort of that in the trenches view where, as we talked about, like, goodness was occurring at the individual level. Like, your experiences as Nick, as, Lieutenant Kalt, as Captain Kalt, like, those things, they mattered. They absolutely mattered. And it gets, a lot of times in the conversation, it gets overlooked because at the larger level, at the strategic level, at the machine level, it just seems like we're all just sort of another cog in the grinding of this like monstrous beast.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, it's hard, without like sort of naming names. I mean, it's hard. And we were talking about this during the break, that like all of the experiences you had, and then I go back in 07, 08, and there's just this massive infrastructure that's there. Fallujah doesn't look like what it looked like 3 years earlier. Haditha Dam is this massive machine of just infrastructure and of the sort of the defense contracting world.
Yeah.
And you see the same sticker in the in the cans as you see in the shitter, as you see in the chow halls. It's all the same thing coming from the same sort of conglomerate, and it does make you wonder, like, what the hell are we doing here?
Well, it makes it almost impossible to not think that the military-industrial complex is profiting from that, which ultimately makes me feel like Iraq was a whole lot of bullshit in a lot of ways. Yeah. And especially when you see your boys shed blood on that behalf.
Yeah.
And at the time I bought into it, and frankly, again, that's part of the contract, right? Is like, hey, I accept that I'm a tool of international policy, of U.S. policy, and there's a handshake on the other side, and it may be the one you wanted or you don't, but hopefully you enter into it with your eyes open. I mean, the Marine Corps does some great things, and that's why I said my relationship with it is super complicated.
Yeah.
Because for as much as I see that relationship with Iraq right now, and knowing how much guys did and still do suffer as a result of it, I also see, so many good things that come from it.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about the touchy-feely, like, friendships and lifelong camaraderie, which is obviously, for me, the number one, but also something as simple as, like, the GI Bill.
Yeah.
Or someone like Paul Grieve, who you interviewed fairly recently, where it's like this guy is making our planet a better place for our kids.
Yeah.
And ultimately the Marine Corps helped him carve a path to do that. And to me, ultimately that's what it's about, right? It's like, let's leave this place a little bit better than we found it. And like I said, the intent still matters there. The concept of service still matters there. And to do that little piece, right to the best of your ability matters.
Yeah, I think that's a really profound perspective, and I think a lot of that for you. And I don't want to tell you what's going on in your own head, but I mean,
I'm still finding out what's going on.
Yeah, let's figure it out together, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea. It's just a hamster wheel that I drop some cheese down every now and again, right? And so, yeah. But I think that like it's that perseverance and that resilience you have, I think allows you almost a greater level of discernment, because like you said, like you are entering into these things eyes wide open.
Hopefully, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm still growing into my understanding of it.
Yeah.
And I told you during the break too, it's like now I've got really small kids. They're 4 and 1. And my wife has asked me, she's like, man, you're telling me you're going to take these kids back to Annapolis and they're going to have the same experience that you did of seeing all this stuff for the first time and not want to do what you wanted to do? And I've wrestled with it and still wrestle to it. Like, what do I do when my daughter or my son says, hey, Dad, I want to join the Marines, or I want to join the military? And at least where I'm at now, and this may not be where I am tomorrow or a month or a year from now, is that, I got to encourage it, because I think the concept of service is still one that's it's not just inherent throughout our society, but I think it's one that's going to carry us through. If anything is going to, it's the one that's going to make the world a better place, not only for us, but for our children, children's children, right? And it's like, how can you stomp on that concept of service? How can you try and curtail that? And I don't think I can, but I'd hope that if that is something my kids eventually want to do, that they do it with their eyes open, that they do it with a sense of service in mind, and again with an understanding of the character and the sacrifice that it takes in order to try and do it against a system or an institution that, while it may project certain values or state that it cares about certain values, may not always necessarily hold to them on an institutional level.
Yeah. Amen to that, brother. I mean, I think too, it's so easy to get so disenfranchised once you see behind the curtain.
Yep.
Once you realize that the wizard is just this old guy,
But I still believe in the Marine Corps.
Right, and that's the thing, and that's where I think like there's so much goodness in what you're talking about, because it's like, hey, even within this thing that seems so removed and so almost antithetical to what it is you want to do, once you're in that trench, once you're with a Marine on your right and your left, and you're running towards the sound of chaos, there's goodness that you can affect, there's change, there's positivity that you can bring at that level. And so let's not lose the forest through the trees, sort of thing. Like, service is important. Being in a position where people are under an umbrella of tyranny, and you, Nick Kalt, Vic Ruble, fill in the name, can go there and help remove that thing, so that, yes, the rest of the world may suck, and it may, but at least the thing they don't have to worry about is dying that day, or being oppressed that day, or having to be scared of that immediate thing that day. They can be scared about a bunch of other stuff, but let's give them the freedom to be afraid of those things, rather than just having to worry about being killed or having their parents killed for speaking out of turn, or not wearing the right equipment, or not praying the right prayer, or whatever it is. Fill in, the extremist shithead du jour.
Sure.
Getting that out of their way, so then let the rest. Then the rest of life can then beat them about the head and ears.
Yeah.
But at least it won't be that one thing that they, like their Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We can at least chip away at some of those other things.
Exactly. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about like the immediate needs, food, shelter,
safety.
Yeah, a certain degree of freedom, right? I think you got to be careful And I know I try to be as well. When you try to impose an ideal that's like very strictly American or very strictly like, hey, this is life according to Nick. But ultimately, I think if people are acting in good faith and trying to make the place a better place for their children, that's what it's ultimately about. Right?
Yeah. And I really do feel like, again, that perseverance theme, like, just don't let the world beat you down.
Yep.
Like, we matter. There's value in what we do.
Yes.
And so just do that. And we'll worry about the bigger stuff, I guess, later on. I don't mean that to sound like dismissive or like to kick the can on the road, because obviously the big issues are big for a reason.
Yeah.
But they can really overwhelm you.
Yes.
And just stifle any of the good intent that you may want to bring to the table. And that I think those things that you bring matter.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree.
And so, again, perseverance. You're medically retired.
Yes.
And I think in most cases, it would be very understandable if you just said, F it, man, I'm just gonna ride this thing out. But you don't. What happens? You go on a ride along.
Yeah. So I was telling you earlier, I thought I wanted to be a teacher after the Marine Corps, and I gave it a try. And it turns out that like high school kids are assholes.
Like, no way. I don't believe.
No, it's true. They're also great, right?
Yeah.
So I was substitute teaching, which is kind of like, I want to say it's like teaching light, because you get to pick and choose the days that you want to work or not work as you see fit. But it's also like you're tossed into a classroom where they're like, hey, substitute.
Yeah, fresh meat.
Yeah, exactly. So, I maybe didn't give myself a fair enough shake as far as like really immersing myself into teaching and finding out what it was like. But I just wasn't enjoying myself, and it didn't resonate with me the way I thought it might. And so I was in California, because I'd sort of traveled around a little bit to do sort of almost like a walkabout after I got out of the Marines. Did some teaching back in California, and a neighbor of mine was a firefighter with the city of Long Beach, still is. I was like, hey man, why don't you do a ride along? I think like apropos of nothing, like with no intent of me getting hired on as a job. I think truly with just the idea of like, hey, let's hang out.
Okay.
You can see what my job is like.
Yeah.
And I showed up, and it was all of the things that I had missed about the Marine Corps that I didn't realize I was missing. It was like the camaraderie. It was the intensity. It was the interaction with other people. It was the element of service with the concept of, I think, sacrifice, or the potential therein, like intertwined with it. That even today, I'm still working on articulating, but it helps for me to think of my current occupation, potentially a future occupation in that regard, because it's like, man, that's what really drives me. And I finished a 24-hour ride along. It was nothing dramatic, I don't think I'm sure we didn't like save any children from a burning building or anything like that, but I got to witness what these guys do on a daily basis, and it was just a jaw on the floor moment of like, they pay people to do that?
Yeah.
And that was back in the day when you'd actually fill out a handwritten resume and deliver it or mail it in, as opposed to like filling out an online resume. Those guys drove me in the fire engine down to City Hall, and I filled in a handwritten resume and delivered it to the HR department or whoever. The hiring process took a while, but eventually I got hired on.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so, are you considered then as a sort of, lack of a better term, a boot firefighter? Are you considered an engineer?
No, you're an entry level firefighter, and you're like, you call it a probie or you call it a rookie. Our probationary period is about a year long.
Okay.
In Long Beach, which is it's almost like, I don't want to say it's boot camp, because it's definitely not boot camp, but there's a 4-month academy that takes place beforehand that just teaches you the entry level task level skills that are required for you to operate effectively and with like the very minimum level of safety standards.
Kind of like an SOI or entry-level school sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Not quite boot camp, but they're still kicking some stress your way. And
you're right, though. It is even like your basic marksmanship, like marching. And while you're not doing that, obviously, it's like, hey, hey, this is how you employ a ladder on scene of a fire. This is how you cut a hole in the roof. This is how you charge a hose line, take a hose line into a building. This is how you do a medical assessment.
Yeah.
And so they teach you all those things so you have a basic level of understanding. And then you get the real, like, kind of on-the-job training and the advancement of your career when you go out. But they do a really good job of, and coming from a military background, it was like, man, the Long Beach Fire Department in particular does an excellent job of taking people from all walks of life, regardless of whether or not they have previous fire experience, and transferring them into the way, like, our municipality does things specifically, but now you're hyper-functional on what we call the floor, but basically like in an operating capacity in the community.
Yeah. And so does Long Beach Fire have their own academy, or is there like a Southern? Okay.
Yep.
So if, say, someone's coming out of the Marine Corps and wants to stay in Oceanside, for example, does Oceanside have their own?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And the preponderance of firefighters in the United States, at least my understanding anyway, is that a lot of them are volunteer organizations, right? You're a mailman by day, or, a stockbroker or whatever, but you carry your pager and you get paged to the scene of a fire and you show up, and someone, maybe one or two people in the department are professional, drive the rig over there, and then you put down your mailbag. And
is that a city budget thing? It's just hard to maintain a
payroll. I think a smaller municipality, especially in like a rural area, it just makes more sense to have a volunteer force. Whereas in Southern California specifically, but really throughout a lot of like the more populated United States, it's professional fire departments. And so each, like a lot of times an individual municipality, especially if it's bigger, like a city of Long Beach, or even like a Carlsbad down south, or LA City or whatever, they have their own fire department. But then there are so many, everything from like major areas in LA County to like small unincorporated areas. If you don't have your own municipal fire department, chances are you fall under the umbrella of Los Angeles County Fire Department, which is an even bigger entity than far bigger than Long Beach.
Sure.
Certainly, but I believe bigger than LA City. And geographically is just massive.
That's massive. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, spread out.
Yeah. Well, and so your time, whereas in some cases, for any of those who are interested in joining fire, it could take a while.
It can, certainly can.
Yeah.
At the time I got hired too, so I got hired in 2008 in Long Beach, which just happened to coincide right with a pretty significant economic downturn. And as a result, I think a lot of municipalities did not hire for a really long time. The difference nowadays, that even, I think with some of the potential economic impacts of the pandemic, a lot of places are still hiring, and really hiring in droves.
Yeah.
And so what went from being like a very hyper-competitive, like thousands of people looking for, a couple dozens of jobs, has now gone to, hey, there are a lot of places hiring. And so for any of the listenership, or I'm a big believer in the fact that military service translates really not only easily, but also really appropriately and really effectively into a career in the fire service.
Yeah.
And so I think the transition is one that makes a lot of sense for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
If that's where your passion lies.
I think in a way, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is obviously rolled according to Vic, but when I look at sort of public service, post-military, one of the things I've heard from a lot of my friends or Marines that I've known who went into police, it seems like it's directly translatable, but then they feel a little disenfranchised because...
Well, here's the thing about police, right? And the joke is like, hey, what do all cops and firemen have in common? Well, they all wanted to be firemen. But it's funny, but it's like, hey, maybe some people are called to be cops as well. And I know some exceptional.
Of course, for sure.
And it's like, we absolutely need these guys doing exactly what it is that they're doing. But I think part of the thing about cops is like you don't get the thanks that you do as a firefighter.
Sure.
Because a firefighter, not all the time, but almost all the time, we're seen as the guys coming to help. Whereas with the police, there's obviously every day something comes out where it's like a chip out of their armor, where it's like, hey, they're either writing you a speeding ticket, or maybe they're racially profiling you, or they're the list goes on and on, right? And I don't think that they're always viewed, sometimes appropriately and sometimes not, as the good guy. And I think the transition to the fire service, for me at least, especially looking back on it and talking like we did about having trouble connecting some of the dots with Iraq and being like, man, is this really appropriate that we're over here? And like really having some heartache about some of it, right? Is that in the fire service, I can tell you 100% of the time, we are showing up with the intent of being the good guy, like showing up on someone's worst day and doing the best that we can to mitigate whatever situation it is that they're dealing with to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
And to me, it's a lot easier to connect those dots. I guess theoretically, where it's like A leads directly to B. Like my job is this, and it almost immediately always translates into helping someone out.
Yeah.
And it could, it's a little hard to translate when it's like, oh, this guy's just got a stub toe and he doesn't really need to be treated by EMS or transported to the hospital. And yeah, we do that a lot too. And sometimes it can feel like not only less than glorious, but maybe like enabling a little bit in a way. But on the other side of that coin is like the fact that we genuinely protect life and property. It's our mission statement, and we're focused on meeting it on a daily basis.
Well, and too, I think that to go along with sort of the perception of the job, a lot of the stuff I've heard from the police, from guys who went into the police force, is how lonely it is.
Yeah.
You don't see a firefighter out there by himself. Like, he's not rolling in the truck.
We live together.
That's what I'm saying. So that sense of camaraderie and teamwork is absolutely critical to what you do, because you physically, well, maybe you could physically, but most physically couldn't hook up the line and then bring the hose in and then fight the fire by themselves.
No, well, I found that out, right? It's like I'm a brand new, I'm off probation and I'm jogging on the beach trail here in San Clemente, and I see a big loom up, a big column of smoke coming from the state park, and I roll over there, and I just run in. I'm one of the first people there, and it's like somebody's truck is on fire, just parked in the state park. No one's trapped inside the vehicle or anything. It's like I'm just kind of standing there, like, well, I'm sort of, I've been trained on all this stuff, but it's dependent on me having not only the fire apparatus here, but also all my protective gear and all the boys to help back me up and do all the parts of their jobs that they need to do. But the other part of that is I showed up for that ride along. It's like, there is a locker room. There's a locker room. What kind of job has a locker room? But with all the customary shenanigans that go along with it, and all the camaraderie, and frankly, all the fucking off and the shit that I missed from the Marine Corps. And that's not to say, and I don't want to give your listenership the impression that fucking off on a daily basis,
slapping each other around.
Yeah, but we have fun doing the job that we do, which I think, frankly, makes us better at doing the job we do. But there's a cop, and he's a pretty seasoned guy that will park outside the fire station. They're the entire north part of town is this guy's beat, but he parks there, and he'll occasionally come inside and use the head. And we've slowly talked him into hey man, come have dinner with us. Let's get to know you a little bit. Yeah. And I know he appreciates, even though most of the time he declines, he'll sit down and we'll chew the breeze in between responding to emergencies. And chew the fat. And he's a great guy, but we get to see his side of the job, which a lot of it is sitting in a patrol car by himself, waiting to respond to the stuff that they respond to. Whereas ours is literally if we're not training or prepping for the next emergency, we're hanging out with one another, and we're professionally developing ourselves. And again, truly, I think the shared sense of camaraderie, the shared sense of purpose, even within our little station, it's so critical to showing up on scene. And it's, again, the concept of the stuff that the Marine Corps taught you, right? Decentralized command, commander's intent, operating without direct supervision, and just knowing, according to the SOPs that we've got, and then the audibles that we call, that all these guys are firing on all cylinders when we show up, is, as a supervisor, the best possible feeling in the world.
Yeah, sort of like that mantra, like the most ready when everyone else is the least ready.
Yeah,
sort of thing. Like you're always on your game. You have to be.
It definitely can be.
Yeah, dude. I really appreciate you being so generous with your time, man. I guess one question I have though, just for our listeners, is how would we understand the role of a captain? Because I think for most of our listeners who have military background, the captain would be the company commander or the section OIC. And outside of like direct combat, which maybe everything that you guys do in response to a call is sort of like direct combat, but like more times than not, the commander has to maintain a certain level of separation because there's other aspects of the job. And then, the whole thing, like you just don't want to get too much in the weeds. Like you're not,
for sure,
you're not a squad leader. You're the company commander.
Right.
There's certain things you have to do. There's a certain level of, you have to be a little bit removed for you guys. Is it the same for fire, or are you like on every call
No, to a certain degree. So we have a really flat rank structure.
Yeah.
We all, frankly, unless you're like the probie, guys are calling each other by their first names.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, and I don't want to give away too many trade secrets specific to Long Beach, but even the chief of the entire department is like a guy that I know on a first name basis. And so I think that not only helps with camaraderie, but it helps flatten out that rank structure to promote independent decision making on scene in a dynamic, like really changeable and really hostile environment a lot of times. And so it's my job. What we do is inherently unsafe. And I hate a lot of these entities and even the propensity of the fire service at large in a lot of ways to swing towards safety. Because in a lot of ways, the fire service has migrated, even in my short time in it, toward hey, we don't go in until we're sure it's safe for us. And it's like, well,
it's too late. Then.
Fuck that. Yeah. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And so our mission statement is to protect life, property, and the environment in that order. Nowhere does it provide for our own personal safety. And I find it inherent as my role as the supervisor, because I really see myself as working for the guys that are technically in my charge. Mm-hmm. But it's inherent that we have the conversation beforehand of like, hey, there's risk involved. There's sacrifice involved. You need to understand that. Your family needs to understand that. You need to reevaluate it on a regular basis. Because I'm going to ask you to do some, frankly, very dangerous stuff. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Probably the most dangerous of which is to stand out on the Southern California freeway during rush hour traffic and deal with patients with potentially like an auto extrication.
Yeah.
Right? But we do all sorts of dangerous stuff. We run into burning buildings. We do auto extrications, exposure to communicable disease. The list goes on, right? But I find that one of my main roles is making sure that these guys have a healthy relationship with understanding what it is that they potentially might be sacrificing for the people that we serve. On scene of an actual incident, as I've already described, showing up for a car fire in my running shorts.
Yeah.
I frankly don't do a whole lot. As they used to say in the Marine Corps, your TO weapon is no longer your M16, it's your radio.
Right.
My TO weapon is exactly the same on scene of a fire. It's my radio.
Yeah, your ability to sort of direct the right people in the right places at the right time.
And I say these guys, I say it, universally for guys and girls. These guys are the workhorses. They're doing the task level stuff that's intimately making a difference in potentially saving someone's life. I'm managing the scene. I'm trying to get the big picture. I'm coordinating with other unit commanders if it's a larger scene. I'm trying to get these guys essentially, the resources that they need to accomplish the task that they need to get.
Kind of like you're in the jump COC, where you're not necessarily holding the hose, but you've got your tack board up and you're...
When I have the good fortune of still like holding the hose or having a tool in hand or helping these guys throw a ladder.
Yeah.
And, I'm generally the last guy on the crew to do it. And a lot of the times, and so it's a really good indicator. If I am swinging a tool, that's a good indicator for me to put the tool down, pick my radio up, and ask for more people to swing.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. So 4 people from another company trying to accomplish the same task that I'm trying to accomplish on my own is generally a better solution. But it's my job to recognize that.
Yeah. That's fascinating, dude. All right. Well, this has been this has been just such a great conversation. I mean, what's next for you?
Yeah.
And do you have any advice for anybody who's thinking about doing public service?
I do. So I think, I encourage public service in all of its aspects. I think it's largely dependent on an individual's strengths and frankly their personal passion. Because I find if you're not going to be passionate about something, it's probably not going to generate enough interest for you to really intimately involve yourself to the point where you're going to learn enough about it to be a professional expert about it.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to be willing to sacrifice what it is that ultimately needs to be sacrificed in terms of service. And I talk about that in terms of the fire service, in terms of, it's not safe, but man, if your call to service is to be an ER doctor, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Go for it. If you're smart enough to do that, if you're capable enough, if you're dedicated enough, passionate enough, please do that. Our world needs you. But at the same time, that's not without its inherent dangers as well.
Yeah.
The exposure to communicable disease, the sleepless nights, the intensity that it takes just to study and get to that point.
Just to be in that kind of trauma.
Yeah. Talk about filling the fishbowl up with marbles before it flows. Yeah. And so you're exposing yourself to a whole lot of stuff that involves sacrifice, and just to go in with your eyes wide open in that regard. But specific to the fire service, I genuinely encourage people to do it. I think it's a phenomenal transition from the military to the Marine Corps. In particular, for me, was a great transition and a great jumping off point to a level of service that I never thought. I never as a kid, I wasn't the kid who's like, I know I want to be a firefighter when I grow up kind of thing. I wasn't. But at the same time, it's so professionally fulfilling. And I feel like so genuinely, and not all the time, but certainly some of the time, leaves our world a better place and helps people out individually and hopefully makes it a better place for our kids. If there are specifics that you want to do, I'll give you my contact information, and the listenership can get in touch with me or with you through me. And I'm happy. I've mentored plenty of military transitionees in the process. What it looks like.
Yeah. We'll put your stuff in the show notes then for sure, man. Thank you for offering that.
Yeah. But if you use your GI Bill, get your paramedic certification, especially if it's in Southern California. You're making yourself so marketable. Go through a private fire academy. Those are the basic wickets.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of them are a pretty big deal, paramedic school in particular. But if you can do it, man, it's...
And there's funding for that, for veterans?
Well, so there can be. And our municipality in specific gives you veterans preference points towards passing the test. And it makes you a more competitive candidate. And I'm glad they do that. Do I wish they did more? Yes. But additionally, utilize those benefits that are out there. And some you find about during tap and tam, but be a bulldog, because some of those benefits are not, they're dependent on even the state or the municipality that you're looking. They might be something that you've never heard about. So, the networking with other vets, and even programs like this, be a bulldog, be tenacious.
Ask the question.
Yeah.
Don't expect them to give you the answer.
Well, because every unit has one transition officer who's assigned to it. And then you do your tap and tam, and there's only so much information they can cram in
5 days.
And it's like, how is this possibly going to be specific to a career that I, Nick, personally want when I get out of here? It can't possibly be specific enough.
Right.
So look regionally, look specific to the job that you want, and I guarantee there are benefits out there. But the vocational rehabilitation, the GI Bill, specifically the post 9/11 GI Bill, is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
Utilize those resources.
Awesome. Dude, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your service, dude. This has been so great.
No, it's my pleasure, brother. I hope people get something out of it.
Yeah. Oh, dude, if nothing else, I got a ton out of this. So, I'm ready to rock now, dude. But thank you again. Dude, Semper Fidelis. And again, dude, thank you. I can't say thank you enough, man.
No, thank you.
All right, man.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am Nick Wilson. That is Major Vic Ruble, U.S. Marine Corps retired. We have also heard the voices of or contributions from William Treuting or Nancy Lichtman editors of Gazette and Leatherneck magazines, respectively. Opinions expressed in Scuttlebutt are just that, opinions, and do not represent any official stance of the MCA.